Hello everyone, welcome you all to the discussion of the critical insights on Woolf's novel Mrs. Dalloway. We are quite accustomed with the writer Virginia Woolf specifically because we had discussed on Woolf's critical essay called Modern Fiction. Remember? If not, you can easily find to the discussion of modern fiction in the earlier videos which is already uploaded. So today we shall discuss critically and with some pointers in regard to the novel Mrs. Dalloway. So let's begin. So let's look what Dr. Oliver Tyrrell from Loughborough University describes as an introduction of the novel Mrs. Dalloway. So he says that it is one of the most celebrated and important modernist novels, perhaps Virginia Woolf's best novel. Even it is quite important to know that Mrs. Dalloway is originally titled as The Hours. Okay, so it is a title that even writers such as Michelle Cunningham would retrieve and use for his 1998 novel, which is entirely based on Mrs. Dalloway. So we can consider that this novel is one of the explored and most reputed novels written by Virginia Woolf. Okay, so can you see? We have put forward an introduction to the novel, and these four highlighting pointers will give you the basic knowledge, or you can say pointers, for having the general concept on the novel. So, Mrs. Dalloway is the name of the main character. The name of the novel is also Mrs. Dalloway, and the central character of the novel itself is named as Mrs. Dalloway. And who is the person? The entire name is Clarissa Dalloway. Okay. In short, we will consider, or we will name this character as Mrs. Dalloway. So she is a wealthy, middle-aged English woman who re-examines her relationships with others and her attitude about the passage of time during the events of a single day. So from the first point, what can you notice that this novel, obviously it surrounds or it centers around the character Mrs. Clarissa Dalloway, and this entire novel, it talks about Clarissa's relationship with others and her attitude which she maintains with the growing passage of time. Okay, and this attitude about the passage of time, it is it is examined during the events of a single day. One single day she has been thinking on, or she has been analyzing her attitude, okay, and her relationships with others. So somewhere you should make it a point that this novel will definitely connect you to the interior feelings of the character, the personal thoughts and emotions of the character. Okay, Virginia Woolf wrote this novel using the literary technique called stream of consciousness. It is one of the important techniques. Remember, we already discussed it during our discussion on modern fiction. Today once again we have discussed this term, we have used this term stream of consciousness. So this is a literary technique which has been used in this novel called Mrs. Dalloway. Moreover, one another important point which you can find is that Mrs. Dalloway is written in past tense, it is not written in present tense. So definitely the entire emotions, feelings, thoughts is based on the past experience, and she has been thinking on those past events or past impressions or past expressions. Clear? So Virginia Woolf originally divided this novel into 12 sections rather than chapters. The sections, which are indicated by line breaks, helped keep the continuous flow of the narrative without the stop that a chapter break typically provides. So one more interesting point to be noted here is that Woolf has broken the stereotypical tradition of writing a novel, which is always done in the name, in the form or pattern of chapter wise. So initially she has divided the novel into 12 sections. Each section breaks in between with maybe line break or punctuation marks and so on, which will help you to retain the flow of emotions, thoughts and feelings in a spontaneous or continuous manner, which we cannot do when there is a division in the name of different chapters. So when there are the term called chapters, we usually have a tendency in our mind that chapter 1 and chapter 2 might have not connection in any line of connection between them. So that is the point where we can, have a break of communication. So that's why Woolf considered this novel to divide into 12 sections rather than into chapters. Okay, so with these introductory points on the novel, we shall try to understand now the context, which is quite important to know. Now, can you see there are three highlights in this slide? Yes. So first point will tell you the context of, you know, the historical concept of King Edward, or you can say Edwardianism to modernism. So can you see I have highlighted King Edward VII's death in 1910. It has signaled the end of the late Victorian age in England. Similarly, we can see Queen Victoria had died in 1901, and finally Britain began to grow more liberal. So religion's influence were completely faded, and women took positions of authority, reformers, and they came forward as radical thinkers too, including other thinkers such as Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, and Albert Einstein, who basically shaped the changing cultural landscape. Technology such as radio and television have increased connection to the world, and the former classicist system favoring wealth and prestige, it looked to be on its own way. So we can see a change in the cultural, social, and scientific approaches of the society. So what happened, during this particular period where there were constant changes, writers in this period, they showed in their styles and topics. Instead of chronicling the past, they turned their attention to the inner lives of the unorthodox men and women. That means they started focusing into the interior lives of the unorthodox men and women. Rather than telling a straightforward story, they wrote in soliloquy. Okay, soliloquy is a type of extended monologue in which characters express their inner thoughts, feelings when they are alone. So they have, these writers of this period, they have come forward to write something new in the context that they were talking now about the inner lives of the unorthodox men and women. So in this similar way, writer, our very own Virginia Woolf, also agreed with many of our contemporaries that a new post-war world demanded a new style of writing, okay, more adaptable and which is tuned to human psychology. That means which will allow or permit to write more on the psychological preferences of human minds. So writers, renowned writers like Woolf, James Joyce, and Marcel Proust, they have tried to experiment with the process or the narration of storytelling, and they have presented characters, thoughts, and conscious mind in a continuous flow. And this flow is called the stream of consciousness that we have introduced in our introductory part. Okay, so we can consider that this new narrative technique, that is stream of consciousness, it has given scope to revisit and to narrate into a new area of new area of narrative techniques. Okay, so can you see the next context which we are discussing obviously is connected to the war scenario. So it is after, you can see, World War I lasted from 1914 to 1918. Britain emerged no longer a world superpower, with the United States and the Soviet Union surpassing Britain in authority. The war was longer and bloodier than anyone expected. Britain's veterans, those who survived, had faced horrific conditions in that particular situation. So this novel, Mrs. Dalloway, it deals directly with the plight of veterans through the character of Septimus Warren Smith. You have a character, right? So it is through the character Septimus we came across the post-war situations and the post-traumatic stress disorder. Remember? So the writer Virginia Woolf has tried to explore how the anxiety and alienation can be caused by the war. So she has tried to put forward the post-war effect, especially with the character Septimus Warren Smith. Okay. So now let's look into the different pattern or the concept of the novel that Wolf has tried to explain. Okay, so Wolf's cycling periods of depression and mania led to multiple treatments, often involving rest and a lack of human contact or mental stimulation. So, one thing to be remembered in context to this novel is that Mrs. Dalloway is, is a novel which has expressed the interior thoughts, feelings, emotions, especially through the technique of stream of consciousness, right? So apart from them, this particular technique, it has also tried to, bring out the mental illness, or the different disorders or anxieties which were going inside the mind. So specifically, we can say that Wolf has brought out the hidden disorders or disturbances or nuisance inside the mind. Okay, especially we can consider mental illness. Wolf and her sister Vanessa were not content with serving tea to male guests. They participated fully in intellectual discussions with the Bloomsbury group. So, how Wolf was in person? Wolf was a very defiant lady, especially she was not a woman who will follow, some typical or stereotypical traditions. You can see the example is right here. She was not content with serving tea to male guests. Rather, she will, you know, involve more in intellectual discussions. Especially, you can see one name has been mentioned, Bloomsbury Group. It is one of the most reputed intellectual groups, you know, groups of scholars or elite people. So this is by person Wolf was, that she was already, quite intellectual personally. So, however, Wolf was still frustrated by the limited roles available for women. We can relate to Wolf and Wolf's frustration, especially through the essay Modern Fiction. Remember, urged, she urged the writers to come forward. Remember? So, her critical essay Modern Fiction also represents her personal thinking process, and in this novel also we can see how the character Mrs. Dalloway and the novel Mrs. Dalloway focuses on the inner worlds of several women, giving them depth and a broader context. So we can understand that Clarissa's calm but less than passionate marriage to Richard Dalloway may reflect those typical gender roles in Wolf's own marriage. Okay. Discuss some of the critical issues, or you can say some of the major factors which are related to the novel. The first is age and memory, because we have been discussing a lot about mental space of mind, or mental illness or space of mind and psychological parts. So age and memory is definitely a critical part of the novel. You can see I have already written here, for many Londoners in Mrs. Dalloway, the past informs the present. So, one thing I think we all will agree, if I say past can never be ignored. Past will reflect in the present. Either you might be tormented with the past, or you might be happy with the past, or you might be affected. Basically, you will be affected either positively, negatively, or some other any emotion. So, you will be definitely a part of the past. So in this similar way, this novel also considers the influence of past in the present. It helps the characters understand why they made certain choices, and it reminds them how full their lives have been. So the fractured, magical, or the prose style, which shows the memory can be unreliable, especially with a character called Septimus. Remember? Yes. So for Septimus, memories are affected by what? By trauma, because of the war situations. It is after the post-war situations that Septimus was still affected by the trauma. The past spirals into the present and creates ghostly vision. So basically you can see a post-traumatic stress disorder in the post-war situations with the character Septimus, right? He used to create some ghostly visions, okay, some horrific, terrible visions, some traumatic visions. I think we all will agree that the feeling of trauma, even if there is anyone who is still undergoing the, effect of trauma, it's quite difficult, because you will be attacked again and again, again and again with the past incidents, right? So it is why, we can say that when you get trauma, when you're attacked by trauma, it is very pathetic, because you will be attacked again and again with the similar horrific feeling. Okay, so that's why we are somewhere relatable, we can somewhere relate to the character Septimus, because uh, traumatic incidents might come into someone's life at some point of time, which will be quite difficult, but it can also be overcome, especially if we all have that, strong willpower. But now we are discussing about the character of Septimus, and we understand his traumatic feelings. The third point, you can see Clarissa thinks frequently of death. Isn't it a traumatic stress disorder? When you constantly think of death, you might be somewhere, you might be somewhere longing for a deep desire in your life, which is still, unfulfilled. In other words, you can say, in very simple words, you can say you are not happy. You are not satisfied. Maybe in a very deepest or in a very sad manner. Okay, and that's why you are constantly or frequently thinking of death. Yet age also creates opportunities for the characters in Mrs. Dalloway. With the perspective age brings, they can appreciate life more than they ever have in their knowledge that is temporary and precious. Sally mentions that she feels more passionately every year. There was a character Sally, so through the character of Sally, we can understand that we should feel more passionate every year. We should embrace the process of aging, because by the end of the novel, aging is celebrated. We all can see there, and rather than feared. We all know we all will age. It's a natural process, isn't it? Aging is a natural process. Death is inevitable. These are universal truth. So we will we will we should, okay, we should embrace the process of aging, so as Sally has done in this novel. So let's proceed ahead and look into the next critical issue, that is stress and mental illness. So stress and mental illness is already a part of age and memory, and it's one of the inseparable parts of the entire novel. Why? Because this entire novel, through in this novel, Wolf is deeply connected into the characters' imaginations, their mental instabilities, especially experienced by whom? Septimus and Clarissa. It is quite relatable and quite, real and honest to the reader, because Wolf has discussed the effect of mental illness they had on their loved ones, such as lonely Razia Smith. Okay, the character. So you can see that stress and mental illness had been a part of the major characters in the novel, isn't it? Even if it for good or bad, but they were undergoing some serious stress or anxieties, such as constantly thinking about that, being lonely and feeling emptiness. They were constantly under the anxiety of isolation. So these all qualities are somewhere representing your that you are mentally ill, or in other words, you are mentally unstable. Okay, can we see the third critical issue? Definitely aftershocks of war, which we can see more specifically with the character of Septimus, isn't it? War, post-traumatic stress disorder. In case of Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway is especially because of the post-war situations. We can see the character of Septimus in this. So post-traumatic stress disorder, it was brought on by the stress of the World War I, and it is most apparent in Septimus as well as his caretaker wife Razia. Okay, caretaker and his wife Razia. So every character feels the effects, okay, the stress and the anxieties which they have experienced during the world war situations. Clear? So while discussing critically on the aftershocks of war, it is the characters Septimus, his caretaker wife Razia. Also you can include Clarissa when she constantly thinks of death. So somewhere you can relate that the post-war situations have quite have been affected, or have influenced the characters greatly. Okay, the next most important critical issue is loneliness. Now, this is not something separately that you can understand, because loneliness and emptiness is a part of the character specifically. Even if they have, even if they have undergone some anxieties due to the post-war situations, they were still lonely. Even if they have not undergone the post-war situations, then also they are lonely. So specifically, loneliness is a part of their life, especially with the characters such as Clarissa, Peter Welsh, who is notably introverted. That means one who cannot open up easily with the society or cannot socialize, in other words, right? So Wolf gives us glimpse into the minds of our characters while at the same time showing their outward communication with the other people. So we can say the wolf has tried to build up a complex series of relations, and her characters deal with privacy, loneliness, communication of these relationships in different ways. Remember, in the first a few minutes of today's class, I said that this novel, it entirely relates into the interior minds, emotions, feelings, and thoughts of the characters, and wolf has tried to maintain this flow of thoughts, emotions, and characters with every characters. You will try to know the characters from inside and not from the outside. Okay. So, can you see how Wolf has represented the characters from inside? The characters that is Septimus, we already are aware that he has undergone, the post-traumatic stress disorder. So, Septimus was constantly facing that inner turmoils, emotions, inner thoughts, which have been affecting his mind. Similarly, the character Richard, remember? Yes. So, Richard could not, express romantically to Clarissa. Richard tries to say I love you to Clarissa, but he is unable to do so, and instead he gives her flowers. So Clarissa even sees Septima's suicide as an act of communication. We all know that suicide is one of the ultimate steps that one takes in life or as a decision. But can you find out that suicide also has a way of communication, just as Septimus has done? It might be a source of communication, either a stop, denial from the life, or so on, isn't it? But its very nature, Septimus can receive no response from the world. It might be any outcome of the actions one has faced in the life. Okay, suicide, taking the suicidal step or committing suicide is not an easy task. It includes a lot of difficult challenges in your minds. If Septimus has committed suicide, it is an act of communication. It might be also that he has got no response from the world. He was, he was placed in a position where he was helpless. So Clarissa notes that Septimus, committed suicide as a source of communication. Okay. So, definitely interior minds and perception is a part of this novel, because we have constantly been discussing about the inner thoughts, feelings, and the instability of minds. So, Septimus is a great example entirely throughout the novel when it comes to mental illness. Even Clarissa was also undergoing through the similar pain, right? So, Septimus is a tragic example of the novel, of how how doctors, when I mean how, if you are ignored, how ignorance can cause a tragic death to your life. Septimus constantly thought that he was ignored, he got no response from the world, and that's why he shows his own way of communication to the world. So it is a step taken by Septimus out of what, out of mental illness or instability of mind. Wolf also gives a brilliant, sensitive treatment of how the mind understands external sensations and time. Long poetic passages capture the perception of images, sounds, memories, and stream of consciousness all at once. The science of psychology was still young in Woolf's time, but in her intricate, penetrating character development, she shows her knowledge of the brain, creating personalities that exhibit the inner workings of all kinds of minds. So, during the time period when Woolf was writing this novel, at that time, the study of psychology was not explored much. So, it is at that period of time that Woolf has, tried to bring out this critical issue through the narration of the novel is appreciable, is applauded by the critics and the readers. And the way of narration, the projection of different images, sounds, these all represents the difficult or interesting perceptions of the writer, Virginia Woolf. Okay. Now we have been constantly talking about stream of consciousness. It is definitely a writing method where you can capture the different thoughts, feelings, and emotions which is passing through inside your mind. And this method's purpose is to allow your thoughts to pass through and you get it expressed through the technique. Okay. So this term was originated in psychology before the literary world ever got a hold of it. It was coined in 1855 by Alexander Bain in the first edition of The Senses and the Intellect. William James in 1890 used it in the book The Principles of Psychology. But the first person who implemented it, who has applied it to a literary text, May Sinclair, discussing Dorothy Richardson's use of the term in her novel Pointed Roofs in 1915. So this is the historical concept regarding the term stream of consciousness. But in today's world, we know especially Virginia Woolf for the explored uses of the narrative technique stream of consciousness, right? So here are some probable questions which are entirely and it is essentially important for specifically for the exam purpose. Discuss Mrs. Dalloway as a stream of consciousness novel. Discuss Mrs. Dalloway as a social satire. Discuss Mrs. Dalloway as a modernist or post-war novel. Why is it significant that Mrs. Dalloway buys the flowers herself? You can discuss it critically. What is the significance of Clarissa's parties? Discuss critically. And what is the significance of the title Mrs. Dalloway? Definitely the significance of the title is important. But this question, what is the significance of Clarissa's parties, discussed critically, it's somewhere coherent or relatable to the second question, discuss Mrs. Dalloway as a social satire. Okay, we'll have to include this parties concept in the social satire too. I hope today's class discussion is especially highlighting on the critical points, not going into the summary or not going into the major themes or character discussion, but we have tried to cover the critical pointers which you can relate or which you can include in your answer making process. Okay. Thank you everyone for listening to me patiently. Hope this entire discussion have been helpful for you, and you can definitely include the points from modern fiction in a relatable way while you were making answers for the novel Mrs. Dalloway. Okay, so with this I conclude the class, and even if you have any queries or any suggestions or anything to be asked, you can definitely use the comment box. So thank you once again.